Dawn broke over the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944, with the ocean stretched flat and endless beneath a pale tropical sky. Aboard American aircraft carriers, the routine of war unfolded in practiced silence. Flight decks buzzed with controlled motion, deck crews guiding fighters into position, pilots adjusting harnesses, engines coughing to life in disciplined sequence. The sea reflected rows of gray hulls moving in perfect formation, radar antennas sweeping the horizon with invisible precision. Far to the west, aboard Japanese flagships, officers studied maps and weather reports, waiting for confirmation that their long-prepared counterstrike was about to begin. This was the moment they had planned for since Midway, the decisive battle, the return of Japanese naval air power. But something felt wrong. Radio reports came in slowly, scattered, confused. Contact with forward reconnaissance aircraft faded into silence. The enemy carriers, supposedly vulnerable, were nowhere to be seen. Yet American planes were already airborne, climbing into the sky in numbers the Japanese had not anticipated. Within hours, Japanese naval aviation, once the most feared striking force in the Pacific, would meet an enemy system so coordinated, so overwhelming, that veteran officers would later struggle to comprehend how completely the balance of power had shifted. And by sunset, the Imperial Japanese Navy would never be the same again. By mid-1944, the Pacific War had entered its most decisive phase. The United States, having recovered from the shock of Pearl Harbor and the early defeats of 1942, had transformed itself into a naval industrial superpower. New aircraft carriers slid into the Pacific in steady succession. Air groups were larger, better trained, and better equipped than anything fielded earlier in the war. Japan, meanwhile, faced a narrowing horizon. The loss of veteran pilots at Midway and Guadalcanal had created a deficit that could not be replaced. Training programs were shortened. Fuel shortages limited flight hours. Replacement aircrews arrived at the front with only a fraction of the experience their predecessors once possessed. Yet Japanese naval doctrine still relied on the decisive carrier battle, the belief that one crushing engagement could reverse the tide. The Battle of the Philippine Sea emerged from this strategic gamble. As U.S. forces landed on Saipan in June 1944, threatening Japan's inner defensive perimeter, the Imperial Navy committed nearly all remaining carrier aviation to Operation Ago. Fleet commanders hoped to lure American carriers westward and destroy them in a massive aerial strike. In theory, the plan was sound. In reality, the balance had already shifted beyond recovery. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, under Admiral Raymond Spruance, brought unprecedented strength to the Philippine Sea. 15 fleet and light carriers, protected by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, formed a defensive shield layered with radar coverage and fighter direction teams trained to manage air combat at scale. This system mattered more than raw numbers. American carriers now operated as integrated networks. Radar operators detected incoming aircraft long before visual contact. Fighter direction officers vectored combat air patrols precisely to interception points. Pilots flew aircraft like the F-6F Hellcat, fast, durable, heavily armed, and forgiving to less experienced aviators. The Japanese had none of these advantages. Their radar coverage was limited. Communications between carriers were inconsistent. Fighter control relied heavily on visual sightings and delayed radio reports. Worse still, Japanese pilots were expected to fight aggressively without coordinated guidance, an approach that had worked in 1941, but not against an enemy that now dominated every technical layer of naval air warfare. By June 18th, both fleets maneuvered cautiously, each searching for the other across hundreds of miles of open ocean. The Japanese believed distance favored them. They were about to learn otherwise. What made the U.S. carrier force so lethal was not aggression, but control. American fighters were not launched blindly. They were positioned with intent. Radar contact meant time to climb, to form up, to strike incoming aircraft before bombers ever reached the fleet. Japanese strike waves arrived piecemeal. Some were detected more than an hour before contact. Others lost navigation and arrived late, scattered, and disorganized. Technological angle radar as a weapon. Radar transformed the battlefield. It turned the sky into mapped space rather than guesswork. Japanese officers, trained in visual reconnaissance traditions, struggled to understand how American fighters appeared exactly where needed, again and again. Enemy perspective, confusion, and shock. Japanese after-action reports revealed disbelief. Pilots reported heavy American fighter presence everywhere. Strike leaders lost formations before reaching attack range. Survivors returned with stories of overwhelming interception, unable to explain how U.S. forces responded so quickly. This was not a contest of courage. It was a collision between systems. Human angle American aircrews. American pilots were not immune to fear. They faced long flights over open water, uncertain recovery, and the constant risk of ditching. But they trusted the system behind them. They trusted radar control. They trusted that someone was watching the sky for them. Leadership angle Spruance and Mitcher. Admiral Spruance prioritized protection of the invasion fleet over aggressive pursuit. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher managed carrier operations with precision, ensuring fighter coverage never thinned dangerously. Their restraint frustrated some subordinates, but it preserved the fleet. Operational angle Japanese collapse in the air. Japanese pilots flew into a storm they could not escape. Their bravery was unquestioned. Their losses were catastrophic. Squadrons vanished within minutes. Air groups ceased to exist by midday. The stage was set for the decisive collapse. On June 19th, wave after wave of Japanese aircraft launched toward the American fleet. Nearly 400 planes took part. Few would return. American radar detected the first strikes at extreme range. Hellcats intercepted relentlessly. Japanese bombers were shot down before forming attack runs. Torpedoes splashed harmlessly into open water. Only minor damage was inflicted on U.S. ships. By afternoon, the scale of destruction became clear. Japanese carrier air groups were annihilated. Pilots with hundreds of combat hours were gone. Replacement pilots never had a chance. The event would soon earn its grim nickname, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. And still, the battle was not finished. On June 20th, American scouts finally located the retreating Japanese fleet at extreme range. Mitcher ordered a daring late afternoon strike, knowing many aircraft would have to recover after dark. It was a calculated risk. American planes struck Japanese carriers, sinking Hyo and damaging others. As night fell, low fuel forced dangerous recoveries. Deck crews illuminated carriers despite submarine risk. Planes ditched. Pilots were lost. But the damage was done. Japanese naval aviation was finished as an effective force. Japan lost over 400 aircraft and the majority of its remaining trained carrier pilots. American losses were minimal by comparison. Japanese officers described the battle as incomprehensible. They had followed doctrine. They had committed their fleet. And they had been destroyed by an enemy system they could not match. Strategically, the Philippine Sea sealed Japan's fate in the Pacific. Without carrier air power, the Navy could no longer protect its perimeter or contest U.S. advances. The road to the Philippines lay open, and the industrial war now favored only one side. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was not just a victory, it was a revelation. It demonstrated that modern warfare belonged not to bravery alone, but to coordination, training, technology, and production. The Japanese Navy had fought with skill and sacrifice, but it faced an opponent that had mastered war as a system. In those vast skies, the future was decided, and it belonged to the carriers of the United States.